Just a few days ago, Capcom released a Q&A report going over their launches planned for fiscal year 2025, and Resident Evil fans are speculating if this report has anything to say about a specific release window for the highly anticipated Resident Evil 9. In addition to that, we are going to go over a complete list of everything that has recently been leaked regarding the content, settings, playable characters, enemies, and more from the leaked playtest information that was provided by Bio Declassified on X. There have been some updates to these leaks that better put into perspective what we may be dealing with in Resident Evil 9, so if you can't wait for that heavily rumored official RE9 reveal at the Game Awards, smash that like button, as we are going to go over a comprehensive summary and analysis of all the recent playtest leaks. First up, we gotta address that recent Capcom Q&A report that dropped last week, as this may have revealed further insight into when Capcom plans to release the next mainline Resident Evil game. When asked about, after releasing Monster Hunter Wilds, what measures Capcom will take to continue achieving double-digit operating income growth for the fiscal year, Capcom replied with, quote, "Although it will depend on the sales status of Monster Hunter Wilds, we are also considering launching AAA titles next fiscal year," end quote. That next fiscal year refers to fiscal year 2026, which begins on September 28th, 2025 and ends on September 26th, 2026. With fiscal year 2025 having already begun this past September, and with Monster Hunter Wilds releasing in late February, Capcom is betting on the new Monster Hunter to exceed expectations, and for some crazy reason Monster Hunter Wilds doesn't seem to meet expectations, other AAA games, like another Resident Evil game for example, could follow. While Capcom's mentioning of other AAA games is quite vague, well, Resident Evil is Capcom's most successful franchise by a good margin, having sold more than 150 million games across the entire series. So while it isn't explicitly stated here, Resident Evil being part of these AAA games is quite inferred. Due to the incredible popularity of the Monster Hunter franchise now, though, it's likely that Wilds is going to be very successful, and this game alone could help carry Capcom through the rest of fiscal year 2025. So that's where fiscal year 2026 comes into play for Resident Evil 9. While Capcom is going hard at promoting Monster Hunter Wilds at the moment, a reveal of RE9 could definitely still happen at the Game Awards, but with the release of Resident Evil 9 in its usual spring season window that every other Resident Evil game has been debuting over the last half decade or so, adhering to a spring launch doesn't seem very likely here, but again, I could be completely wrong. Releasing RE9 in early fall next year seems much more likely, as it 1. Adheres to a fiscal year 2026 release, 2. Gives more time for Monster Hunter Wilds to grow and bask in the spotlight, and 3. And less importantly, its strategic debut in time for the Halloween season could be appropriate. Capcom could also just plan to release the game in the first half of 2026 anyway, as this would still adhere to their fiscal year 2026 plans, but yeah, that's just me. I'm basically hypothesizing that due to Monster Hunter Wilds' release early next year, that if Capcom were also interested in releasing Resident Evil 9 in 2025, that Capcom would break from the tradition of releasing Resident Evil games during the spring months and instead would release the game several months later into the year to give Monster Hunter Wilds its time in the spotlight. Let me know what your own interpretations of this are in the comments, and when you think Capcom will release Resident Evil 9. There have been recent leaks suggesting no clear idea of whether or not Resident Evil 9 will be releasing in 2025 or will be pushed back to sometime in 2026, so hopefully, fingers crossed, we will get the reveal at the Game Awards, along with some sort of release window so that we can finally break this big drought of Resident Evil static silence. Alright. Let's now turn the page to focus on the more recent leaks revealed from the 2 playtest sessions for Resident Evil 9 as reported from Bio Declassified over on X. I covered the bulk of the setting, enemies, locations, and more in the previous video in great detail, but to provide extra context and clarity as to how this new playtest info fits with the previous batch of info, I'll be going over everything again, fitting this new information in their appropriate spots to create the most current, updated look at all the leaked stuff regarding the 2 playtest sessions. For those who have already seen my previous video, skip to this time here to get to the new stuff, but for everyone else who wants the context of how this new information sits within the existing information, you're gonna want to watch the whole thing. Again, these leaks have not been confirmed by Capcom, so go into all this with grains of salt. Big thanks to the YouTube channel Residents of Evil and Will at Horror Game Central for compiling all information within these leaks. To start, let's first talk about the game's characters. Both Jill Valentine and Leon S. Kennedy are said to be the main characters in Resident Evil 9, interestingly corroborating what we saw in the placeholder art for PlayAsia's listing of the game that went up in early June. While Jill and Leon are said to be the main playable characters in Resident Evil 9, apparently Chris Redfield and Barry Burton serve as supporting characters here. Chris Redfield has been present throughout the last several mainline Resident Evil games, but Barry Burton? Man, I'd be more than happy to see him here in Resident Evil 9 after all this time, but let's get back on track. Jill Valentine is said to be dressed more tactically in this game, reflecting an appearance similar to that of her look in the Resident Evil 5 Lost in Nightmares DLC, while Leon's look reflects something closer to his appearance in Resident Evil Damnation. While Jill will be looking decidedly younger like her appearance in Resident Evil Death Island, Leon is said to be looking much older. Alright, so we've got both Jill and Leon as main playable characters here. Plus, we have Chris Redfield and Barry Burton as supporting characters so far. But as for the setting, well, Resident Evil 9 is said to be taking place 4 years after the events of Resident Evil Village, and we are talking about the core campaign of RE Village covering Ethan Winters' saga, and not the one that takes place a number of years in the future with the Shadow of Rose DLC. According to the playtester, Resident Evil 9 will represent the closing act of the Resident Evil 7 Biohazard and Resident Evil Village story with the Megamycete. So while the Winters saga seems to have come to a close in the last two games, Resident Evil 9 will serve as the last entry in this trifecta of Megamycete-centric entries, punctuating the finale of this arc. With Jill Valentine of the BSAA, the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, and Leon S. Kennedy of the DSO, the Division of Security Operations under the jurisdiction of the United States federal government, the pair link up to investigate an island where the organization who created Evelyn resides. While not listed in this leak, this organization is likely referring to The Connections, who developed the first E-type bioweapon, E-001, known as Evelyn, by using a sample of the mold supplied by Miranda, along with a sample of DNA from Miranda's daughter Eva. This bit likely intrinsically ties much of Resident Evil 7 and 8 to the plot here in Resident Evil 9. Getting back to the plot of RE9, this company on the island is said to be creating mass clones of Evelyn with the Megamycete, and it's our job as Jill and Leon to bring this whole operation down. Both Chris Redfield and Barry Burton's support is said to come in the form of radio calls, with one of these calls mentioning Rosemary Winters, Ethan Winters' daughter. While we don't know the population nor the location of the island the game is said to be taking place, this all-star cast of RE protagonists is said to use Rose's blood to serve as a vaccine to rid the Megamycete infection. And speaking of, Jill and Leon are both said to eventually become infected with the Megamycete. Blue Umbrella is also mentioned to be making a return here in Resident Evil 9. As for what the island has in store for us insofar as locations, an abandoned hospital, caves, abandoned houses, a dark forest, an abandoned factory, a laboratory, and a temple were mentioned as being locations from the playtest. More specifically, Jill Valentine's section was said to have taken place in an abandoned hospital during the April playtest, whereas Leon's September playtest took place in the dark forest area. Let's now talk about the kinds of threats that were said to have been encountered by the playtester. Similar to the Ganados in Resident Evil 4, the main enemies here in Resident Evil 9 were said to be evolved zombies that can use melee weapons. They worship the moon and have moon tattoos on their arms, which reflects some of the earlier leaks about the title, preliminarily referred to as Resident Evil Apocalypse, placing great importance on the moon cycles, and most importantly, the 9th moon cycle. These enemies are said to be heard singing to the moon while looking out at sea, further corroborating the game's potential importance of the moon in Resident Evil 9. The antagonist is said to be a man called Mr. Simon, and while his motivations and persona weren't fleshed out from this playtester, other big threats are said to be in the game as well, including the final thing mentioned from this playtester being a persistent enemy that will be stalking Leon, while another enemy, the Goat Man, is said to be after Jill. With the overview of the leaks now fresh in your mind, let's dive deeper into both of these playtest sessions, starting with the one that took place in April featuring Jill Valentine exploring an abandoned hospital on the island. The playtest tasked players with locating a serum to combat the mutamycete infection affecting the residents. In the hospital, Jill encounters a number of mold-infected zombies who are armed with a number of weapons like axes, scythes, knives, and planks of wood. The playtester reported that Jill was equipped with a shotgun, a pistol, and a knife, along with crafting materials for ammunition and a variety of herbs and first aid sprays. It is in this hospital that a creature known as the Goatman, a hulking brute with horns, a massive axe in hand, and a huge mouth on his belly, stalks Jill throughout the rooms and halls of the hospital. Just like Mr. X and Jack Baker during their respective stalking sections, for example, the Goatman is said to not be able to be killed. Rather, it can be temporarily incapacitated. Throughout the hospital section, Jill is said to receive radio support from Chris Redfield, who provides further insight into the infection and its hallucinatory effects. The other support character, Barry Burton, also makes an appearance and advises Jill on weapon upgrades and general survival. According to the playtester, the session ends with Jill being overpowered by the Goatman, leaving her unconscious and ultimately becomes infected. Moving on to the September playtest featuring Leon S. Kennedy, the session began on a beach under a moonlit sky. It is here where Leon observes a group of zombies that appear to be praying to the large moon near a bonfire. Moving into a dense forest setting after leaving the beach, Leon approaches Mr. Simon's laboratory, where the player was said to be tasked with tracking down Mr. Simon, as this antagonist is involved in creating cloned bioweapons of Eveline. Leon's gear included a machine gun, a pistol, a knife, and some first aid sprays. The enemies Leon was said to encounter in the forest section include axe-wielding zombies, a witch-like woman capable of turning into flies, and hallucinated enemies that manifested as dog-like creatures. The witch is described as an eerie and seductive enemy that cannot be killed, as it taunts Leon throughout the area. Leon's playtest comes to a halt at a Blue Umbrella research base. And there you have the complete, most up-to-date set of playtest leaks as reported by Bio Declassified. I'm liking the sound of these leaks, to be honest, and I'm curious to see just how grand this game is going to be, as other leakers have suggested Resident Evil 9 is to be the most ambitious game in the series, but let me know your thoughts on these playtest leaks in the comments below. In the next video, we're going over the complete, robust history of leaks regarding Resident Evil 9 as we approach a potential reveal at the Game Awards. But before that, join me over in this one as we go over the scariest games in all of Silent Hill, ranked least scary to the scariest. That's all I have for you in this one. I'll see you all real soon in the next video.